Today on Twin Cam, we're back studying the quirky and the obscure, just the way I like it. Over a year ago now, I made a video on the wonderful DAF-66, so I thought it made sense to explore that avenue further by looking at this brochure for the 66 from September 1972. If you aren't aware of DAF's car-making talents, I'm sure you will be aware of their trucks, the Dutch company having produced goods vehicles for the best part of a century. But from 1959, they also started making small cars, and did so until the mid-1970s. The 66 we're looking at today was the final car DAF launched on their own before the car manufacturing side of the business was swallowed up by Volvo in 1975. This brochure is from the car's launch in September 1972 and acts as something of a reminder for a vehicle now largely forgotten despite being designed and manufactured by what is now a very successful brand. Despite having its history in big trucks, DAF only ever made compact or small family cars, the 66 being one of the latter, replacing the DAF-55 that had been around since 1967. This brochure focuses completely on the engineering that sets DAFs apart from any other cars in the world of the same time period, though we'll get to the centre of that point in a little while. Despite being small, DAF attempted as well to make their later cars appear very dignified, with a subtle sense of luxury that the majority of other cars of this size completely lacked in the early 70s. This is primarily due to the styling from the pen of Giovanni Michelotti, a point that becomes very obvious when you look closely at the 66's stylistic features. They bear incredible similarities to the likes of the Triumph Toledo and Dolomite. This relationship is clear from all angles, but is most obvious in the rear quarter, with the kink in the side window, the sheltered back window, clearly defined rear end, horizontal rear lamp units, and the location of the badging all being a carbon copy of the Triumphs that were launched at almost the same time. That's no bad thing though. If you've watched my Dolomite video, you'll know just how highly I rate that car's styling. In the case of the DAF, however, everything is toned down, as you'd expect for a smaller, cheaper car, while making it appear much more utilitarian in concept thanks to the less defined side profile, wheel arches, basic bumpers, and the simple full-width egg crate grille. But it's the carefully considered chrome detailing, kink in the rear side window, the coach line following the single swage line, the aforementioned sheltered rear window, and despite their simplicity, the elegance with which the wheel arch lips are defined in the pressing of the panels that make this simple utilitarian three-box saloon appear that one step more distinguished than quite a lot of the competition. That theme of utility, with just about enough flair to appear more luxurious than maybe it really is, continues with the interior. The function in this 66 SL is very basic, with no sight of a radio or cigar lighter, but it does have fully padded doors, cloth reclining seats, a padded dash rail, fitted carpets and wood trimming on the dashboard and around the gear selector. It seems as though a lot of thought was put into how DAF were going to market this car, realising that in order to sell it in decent numbers with its mechanical advances intact, they had to make it look and feel, in places, like a quality product. The extent to which DAF managed to achieve this facade is not only illustrated by these images, but by the fact that when Volvo took over the company, they weren't happy with the real quality of the products being produced for quite some time. At the rear of the car, we begin to see a few of the DAF's smartest design touches. The first of these is a feature largely antiquated by the early 1970s for safety reasons, but the fuel filler is hidden behind the number plate, making the body styling cleaner. Additionally, the spare wheel is located under the bonnet, enhancing load space and making it easier to change a tyre. But the main attraction is the luggage space itself. Although the load lip is predictably high, the boot is incredibly large considering the rear-mounted transmission that makes these cars special. Again, we will get to it, but this level of load space is an absolute credit to the incredible packaging skills of the DAF engineers that ensured a tiny car could hold a serious amount of luggage alongside 4 people in relative comfort. So far today, we've only been looking at the top spec DAF 66 SL. But even the lower spec L retains the touches that may, and in the British market at least definitely, have made this car look well thought out and well specified in 1972. The genuine luxuries of cloth upholstery, fitted carpets and wood trim are gone, but it retains the fully padded dash and doors while replacing the wood with a painted finish. Having said all this, with an exterior sprayed over in white and without a coach line, the side profile suddenly appears much more austere. It still has the inherent stylistic touches, but its simplicity does rise to the top. In my video on the 66, a lot of comments came in relating its styling personality to a Soviet-built Fiat, and in this base spec, or in the beige of the car that I made that video on, that becomes a lot clearer. This isn't to contradict what I was saying before about Michelotti, but to show that, through my eyes at least, the 66 has a confusing and multifaceted character. It's a car that ought to be austere and utilitarian, but when specified to suit the advanced engineering underneath and to support a small manufacturer like DAF, it takes on that other character. The fact that the lower trim level is reserved for the back of the brochure is a very simple marketing move that subconsciously prioritises the SL in the mind of a prospective buyer. In every brochure we've looked at from the 1970s, and the majority of them from the 1980s, we always see the trim levels rise up. Here we see them tumble down, and I feel that relates back to how the car itself is specified, to impress at first glance despite a relatively basic reality. And now the part we've all been waiting for. The engineering feature that makes all DAF cars unique is the Variomatic Transmission. And the 66, the ultimate variation of a DAF badged family car, even gets an exotic rear suspension to boot. The company sees this as such a big part of the car's identity that every page we've seen today mentions Variomatic either by name or by functionality. It's the paramount reason anyone would buy a DAF, giving it a loyal customer base and a rather clear reputation with the public as to what kind of person buys a DAF. Unfortunately for the company, easy to drive translates out of marketing speak as old person's car. While this obviously didn't help sales, DAF was never really targeting younger audiences head on. They did do the rakish 66 Coupe, but just look at everything we've already discussed today. This is a manufacturer very comfortable with that slightly more mature, more conservative customer base. It could also very easily be argued that this was a necessity, as DAFs weren't exactly cheap. With the Variomatic system and the suspension that we'll discuss in more depth in a moment, a basic DAF would have set you back, at its launch, £998. At the same time, in September 1972, the top-selling Austin 1100 would have only been £867, with the brand new and utterly brilliant Fiat 127 at £911. Cheaper than those two, however, were the Datsun Cherry at only £850 and the Ford Escort, only £3 more than the Datsun. A DAF, therefore, was not a go-to compact family car. It was a niche thanks to its engineering. And getting back to it, Variomatic is what we know today as a continuously variable transmission. And in this form, it's all exposed out at the back in front of the rear axle. So if you look underneath a DAF, you can see the rubber belts and pulleys that allow the variable ratios. They did this for two reasons. First, to increase cabin space as there's no transmission tunnel taking up valuable footroom, and second, for weight distribution. The 66 has a near 50-50 weight distribution, and as the Variomatic system here also acts as differential, it removes another link from the system. The suspension that acted around this arrangement was a Dion tube, a rather advanced and relatively rare system usually reserved for much more expensive cars such as a variety of Alfa Romeos and the Rover P6, as well as sports cars such as the Lotus 7 and Aston Martins for a couple of decades. The image in the top left corner is the best I've seen in describing how a Dion tube works. Springing is done through traditional leaves with hydraulic shock absorbers above, but the tube itself sits alongside the drive shafts and always keeps the camber angles of the rear wheels consistent, making handling much more predictable than most suspension systems in use at the time. DAF made it clear at the bottom of this first paragraph that the system is totally reliable, and they famously demonstrated this through the best form of car torture, rallying. It's a fair point about the reliability of such a system, as the British public was acutely afraid of anything that didn't have a live axle and an overhead valve engine at this point. For them to be introduced to a system that, on the face of it, was very complicated must have scared off quite a few people, but DAF did their best to alleviate any doubts. The front end is a completely different kettle of fish, as it's all well accepted and conventionally engineered. Suspension is achieved through torsion bars, and the power unit is the 1108cc variant of Renault's Clé Enfant, the engine that was used in everything from the Renault 4 through to the original Twingo. In this form, it produces 47 brake horsepower and drives through a centrifugal clutch. The DAF-66, I feel, is one of the most unfairly forgotten cars of the 1970s. It's a car with clearly interesting engineering and a very specific customer base that's worth discussion, as they had a nailed-on niche in the market. It's also the last car they engineered completely on their own, as with its successor, the DAF-77, their new overlords, Volvo, rebadged the car just before its launch as the Volvo 300 series. So this is a link-up between the old age of DAF cars and the family of compact Volvos that have emerged since. In the swamp of mechanically boring but socially important cars of this era, the DAF is a light of engineers doing something kind of for the sake of it, and I love that. On that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.